Hello, and welcome to the second installment of the MUD Parcel Reading Series for 2022. This series is a video companion to the MUD Proposal online journal and archive. Currently on its 7th edition, the MUD is annually updated and features poets and projects that are international in scope and multidisciplinary in focus. So I am Pat Clifford. I'm a social worker and poet, producer of this series, and my co-editor, Aryanil Mukherjee, is our host and discussant. So we're joined today in this installment by poet Murat Nemet Nejat. Murat is the editor and translator of İda, an anthology of contemporary Turkish poetry, Talisman, 2004. A poet, translator, essayist. His recent books include poems Spiritual Life of Replicants from Talisman in 2011, Animals of Dawn, which we'll be hearing from today, Talisman 2016, and Io's Song from Chax 2019. And he's currently working on a new manuscript, Camels and Weasels, here. So welcome, Murat. Is there anything you'd like to add to your bio before we get started?
No, that's good enough. Thank you very much.
Great,
welcome, Murat.
Thank you. We'll start off with you reading. I believe you'll be reading from Animals of Dawn, and then afterwards we'll have a discussion.
Okay, I will start just the way I read. My poems are long, a kind of book form. So what I do, I start page 1 and read a certain amount instead of doing selection. And I think in my case, that's the best way I feel the poem begins to communicate itself. Animals of Dawn. I want to make Hamlet to disappear. The lightning that didn't strike made me disappear completely. And her arms unknowingly caresses the water. Wall, haiku, haiku, hai, ku, haiku, haiku, haiku, haiku, haiku, hai. Plop frog, circles disappearing in fine night. Until I touch her, my sister gave hope, but her corpse was heavy out of water. Don't touch the translucence, they turn into wing crumbs. Oh God, I could live in an oyster and count myself belonging to infinite space. But I have bad dreams. Denmark is a prison. Your ambition makes it so. The chain of numbers, sex, dedicated to Stefan Mallarmé, the dice poem. And the poem has a visual dimension. You can see it a little bit here. On the left side, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the other side, 6, 4, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the interesting is that the dice is a symbol of chance. But if you count the top and the bottom, the number always the same as a 7. Okay, so the chain of numbers 6, dedicated to Stefan Mallarmé. 1 ado 6, 2 adore 5, 3 adore 4, 4 ardors 3, 5 radar 2, 6 order 1, 7 le hasard executed at each throw of the die disappears. Le hasard imprisoned in each throw of the dice. Dracula, Horatio, I'll cross it, though it blasts me. Stay, illusion, speak to me. Existence is a very rare event. Out of the infinities that don't happen, these lines are about the left out and their liberation the non-existent, you have nothing to lose but your walls. Russet mantle, unfold thyself. Who is it? Run your comb through the hair of the night. It's bitter. The hour line approaches a ghost. At 12 p.m., all drinks will turn. At 12 p.m., all drinks are wine. Radical erasure, the experiment connected to death. Who is it? I can't remember. After a dream, facts are the morning dew. I'm sick at heart. The bird of dawning singeth all night long, star ghost. Infinity is there, a twinkle in my dad's eye, and I'm alive and he's dead. Jackson Pollock. Time, a spray of colors that are only when it's looked at, followed the rhythms of attentions, the eyes recalcitrant, incorrigible darts, every instant a variant color, past, present, and future of a distant, self-penetrating dream, a dream within a dream. Like cockroaches, images, facts hide into themselves. Only when a lightning switched to light the darkness. Arcing inward, I jump, tantalus. MIR, this is about MIR machine, but the spelling is AMARRENI, MRI. Machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, cha-cha-cha. Machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, cha-cha-cha. Turnover. Machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, cha-cha-cha. Machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, cha-cha-cha. Turnover. Brain. The Matisse circle. As in a Matisse painting, the unreals hold hands and dance around a fireless fire. Conversation among unreals is what idea is. Cutouts into the green valley entered the short-winged bird. One. Bars that the birds fly against the notes, flapping, blue notes escaping towards horizon. Two. Bars as the birds fly against the notes, flapping, blue notes escaping towards horizon. Manifesto. Music imprisons the angel of chaos into its bars, doesn't imitate time, compensate for its absence. Sing, sing, a bird called, flying prison. In the tree of pears, numbers are flying. Oh, the bears eating from trees, bearing fruits. From the thorn and bloom, the slowly melting dew, absinthe. Cinema verite, zombie. Non-existing, being a state of being, it appears in the film reel. God is that being whose essence is non-existing. In her last forbidden caresses, a weeping dreamboat, sleek like otters, fresh out of water, streaking, oh, dripping on my sighs, peels, P-E-A-L-S, appealing to his appearance, walls join, peeling in the groan of desire. For him the bells toll. From the table of my memory, I'll erase all fondled things. Crowing clock, crowing clock, crowning cock, once entered crowning, corrupting doom in incestuous sheets, or russet's mantle of dawn, nature condemned to a prison of colors, light loom, ray stings unknowingly caressed her body. The bruises in your thighs encode my corrupted, almost forgotten passion, are my secret pressed flowers between the leaves of your diary. Your body is like one of those children's green paper slates I can write on and erase and rewrite. That space remains in the virginal, vertiginous territories of dreaming, a blue evening constantly resting in it. The sea on your skirt pitches into the soul, the quiet of sleep. That space, in what continent of dreams, snaked by what river? The purple quiet of questions in your eyes, the unlit fire of the moon sadness as if only hidden in your hands, in this parted space of exile, forever sentenced. Spinal violins in haunted homes, straps, volume endures, lashes and eyelashes of I'll take joy, sing, outbreak in skin up the river, Polonius, the wind is sitting in the shoulder of your sail, a pace, Laertes, Hamlet, swift as the wings of love, I hasten to my revenge. Remember, it's a visual sense, it's a straight line, one single line. The word spells the Stendhal syndrome, which is a person looking into a painting and disappearing into the painting. It's a kind of syndrome that the filmmaker Argento uses. To see the wall, one must hang a coat on it. Paintings continue the invisibility. The odalisque, the red odalisque has encountered anxiety. In the grave's beluga lungs. What happens to the baby's voice inside the sarcophagus? It shrivels into a dream. What happens to the thought of the baby's sound inside the sarcophagus? It expands inside the dream. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for that powerful reading. Yeah, so it's having the work read really brings the work to life. Let me see. I think I may need to turn on Aryanil's camera. You're joking. The Zoom world. It's like when you had the comment from Hamlet's "Stay illusion," and sometimes in a Zoom reality, it's kind of that same feeling. It's like, wait,
Finally, in Zoom,
wait, where have you
it
gone?
exists before you, and you are dispensable.
Right. Awesome. So, Aryanil, you were going to kick us off with some.
Yeah, I do have some questions, Murat. I mean, obviously, having having blurbed your book, I have had a chance to read it several times in the past. So I go back to it. I mean, since this is the questions and the answers are more for the audience. So I will re-ask some of those questions. So my first question to you is, was this book part of a preconceived and pre-planned project, or did the poems naturally evolve and occur, and the latent themes identified thereafter?
No, it was not preconceived at all.
Okay, I see.
Okay. As a matter of fact, it took me 5 years to write this poem. Okay, and the poem is about 67 pages, so it's not like 500 pages. Someplace after 2.5 years, suddenly I wrote a poem relating to Hamlet. I said, what is this poem doing? And then I began to write one or two others. And I said, what is this thing doing here? Who is going to read anything about Hamlet? But it entered into the poem, and kind of basically it became almost a kind of Talmudic meditations around words, around kind of things. It ended up being like a holy text, a mysterious holy text that nobody understands. And these are kind of poems. Each poem became a kind of commentary, parallel commentary on it. No, the only thing that I knew when I began, and this is the way I don't plan. I start very vague feelings. I am very much against imposing an initial thing. I wanted to write a poem where you read it, you go through experiences. At the end of it, you have learned nothing. No additional wisdom, nothing, just the experience of the poem. And that was the only thing I had that's what I began with.
Okay. I had a side question to this first, a second part to this first question. I mean, although towards the end of the book, in your annotated text, you explain it, but I would still ask here, if you could talk a little bit about the choice of the word animals for title and the explanation of that metaphor. Animals of Dawn.
Yeah, the title came to me in an instant someplace towards the end of the poem. It wasn't that I'm going to do it. I chose the title, then kind of began to look at it. Why is it kind of, it turns out to be, I think, it's a kind of very apt. Let's talk about the dawn part of it and the animal part of it. The focus of, in relation to Hamlet, the focus of this poem is on the first act and a half of the Hamlet. It is the part of it when you see the ghost and you see in the morning, another day, Hamlet talking, the king talking, and he goes back and sees, he sees the ghost, and then he goes back to take a revenge in the morning. So that the whole thing takes place in dawn, okay? Okay. And the ghost is and a lot of things are experienced. Animals are pervasive in this thing. There are cats, there are birds, a lot of birds, there are cats, and they all occur in dawn. A lot of things happen in kind of semi-darkness, and just when the light is coming, but the morning hasn't come yet. That's basically what, to me, Animals Dawn means. Yeah.
So in a certain sense, one could call this poem an obeyed and obeyed, or
Yeah, I suppose you can. I had never thought of, yes, exactly. A weird kind of, oh, yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah. Celebration of not knowing, as I said, because I don't know what that morning brings. It brings only misery and confusion. Yeah.
so that'll bring me to something which you have already mentioned. So my formal question was, could you please explain why the Prince of Denmark is making his reappearance in Animals of Dawn?
Why?
Why?
To be honest with you, kind of essentially, I don't have an answer for that, because he appears because it appears. As a matter of fact, I wasn't happy by his appearance. Okay. You know, you want your poetry to be read, and to put Hamlet, to write another poem about Hamlet, first of all, so many people have done it, you know. I mean, one day, you know, another poem about, you know, Hamlet. That's the big thing. The second thing, paradoxically to that, it has this feeling of academia, kind of using Hamlet and so on and so forth. And so I didn't really want to use it, but it appears, and you know, a lot of this poem, and a good deal of my other work also, has to do in relationship between father and son. Okay, and father being kind of authority and power in multiple ways. Okay, and that's, I think, that's really what Hamlet's about. The second thing, which I suppose is an obsession in all my poems, once again in retrospect, is that they all deal in various ways about the experience of dying. What is death? Okay, you know, I mean, that's in a way mystery, and that's what it's all about, really. And I have many poems about. I think Hamlet is about death, really, finally, about dissolution and the experience of dissolution. And this, in the poem I say, I divide, there are two kinds of time. You know, there's this daylight time, this chronological time, and this kind of timeless period. And the problem is about Hamlet, the character, is that he lives in that time zone, and everything else happens in the other time zone, and you cannot enter it. It's very destructive. Then interchange occurs. That's probably dawn occurs. This is really Animals of Dawn. Just morning is there, but the ghost belongs to the night, you know, and its message is to the night. In the morning, looks ridiculous, you know, and people don't talk very much about it. Outside the soliloquies, okay, Hamlet does a lot of awful things to other people, especially to Ophelia. You know, he says awful things to her, all right? And why? I mean, he says, I'm going to kill my father Swift. I mean, my father, Claudius, okay. There are so many fathers in this play, you know, why does Shakespeare spend so much time giving advice, Polonius advice to his son? Why does he do that? By any logic of a good play, any editor, modern editor, will throw that scene out. Why does it have such a prominent place in the play? You know, and to me, Hamlet is a very mysteriously bad play. But I love that. I mean, that's what draws me to it.
Yeah, the death thing is, I mean, your reference to death, I understood. I mean, that's a very valid way of looking at Hamlet and rereading it. It shows up in this book too. You know, Animals of Dawn, just because you brought up dawn, it reminded me that in a lot of literatures, actually, it is dusk, which is in a scene as the hour of transcendence. But it's really interesting that you,
It's very
for
true.
you,
I
it's the
didn't thought of
dawn.
that, but that's correct. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, sheep kind of meadow, kind of the bells are tolling.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
that
Right.
also, yeah, no down. You know.
I just thought of a scene in fact, in very ancient Bengali poetry. They actually, the poetry was written in a language which was called evening tongue,
Yeah,
and those were the Buddhist poets. This was about 1100 years back, when the modern day Bengali language had not quite formed. It was derived from this ancient language, which was called the evening tongue. The poets were all Buddhist poets, and they usually wrote at dusk after coming
well,
back
they
home
did.
from work.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then I suddenly remembered a scene from Nazarene towards the end.
yeah.
Binuel's Nazarene, um, who is the pastor, and he is in a state of conflict with his own teachings, because there's a prostitute, I think, and a thief, a petty thief, who were going to be persecuted. And he doesn't think, I mean, he's not in favor of the persecution, because obviously they're sinners, and a true Christian should pardon the sinners. But on another hand, he is for the prostitution. So this inner conflict comes out, and he's walking, and it's autumn time, and the trees are shedding leaves. And that's also a dusk scene.
That is a romantic poetry. That is dusk. You know, it is usually it is in English poetry. Dusk is. You see, this idea of dusk. There's a very famous Turkish poem. It's called A Ladder. The title, it's about the end of day. Okay.
Okay.
The poem is in the Eda anthology, as a matter of fact, I translated. Okay.
Who's
Is
the
it
poet?
Ahmet Hashim?
Okay.
He's the first poet in the anthology.
Okay.
And what really happens is that what is amazing about that poem is that mostly in terms of colors is describing the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you finish the poem, you have a feeling that the speaker is entering a new beginning.
I see.
All right. And kind of, it is almost the end of a spiritual state and starting a new spiritual state. Or you die, but you really go into a new space. Okay. That is really, you know, finally I come from Turkey, you know, I grew up, I think probably there's an element of that even in Animals of Dawn, that as a matter of fact, I have a footnote there about cast of characters with a little, each character about, with that person.
Yeah, I saw that, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I call Hamlet the fakir of Elsinore, you know, and so that's basically the dervish, you know, kind of the thing, the vagabond of Elsinore. Yeah, that's partly that's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
So on with the questions. The second question, the third question I had is, or maybe I'll ask you the fourth question, because that'll, by the time you reply to question 3, you might have already answered question 4. So you know, I did read the book, and I don't know, Pat, how you read it, but I read the book as a creative, responsive text, and I think you sort of make it obvious in your annotations. It seems like there are several voices at play in that book, or rather responses to voices. And then I see that you have, you know, altered the font types, especially used a lot of italicization, and of course there is that anecdote at the end of the book. So could you please clarify the use of some of these, especially the italicizations? When you italicize.
Okay,
The
that's a
voice.
kind of essentially. I want to say something. That's a very. My poetry has a visual dimension. Okay, even therefore, I didn't get reading it. For example, some of those poems, there are puns, there are visual elements to it. Where a part of a poem is placed on the page is important. It's not random in my case. I arrange. I kind of see each poem, each page visually. Mm-hmm. And in the previous poem, from Animals of Dawn is the spiritual life of replicants, which is basically filmed in that very consciously I was using film language, the way film communicates experience, into a poem. I said, I want to make a poem using film language. Okay.
I see, that's interesting.
And then I discovered, first of all, where you see things on the screen, on the page, every corner, every part of the page or a screen has a value, emotional value, where it appears that thing. Okay. It's very subliminal, you know, but it is there. And also I found out that there are visual elements. You can communicate things that escape syntax. Okay. You made a very important point that I constantly, in most of my poem, if single piece has multiple ideas that kind of jostling against each other, okay, I say something like this. I found that perhaps it's the most obvious. If some of those voices I italicize, I begin in the reader's mind, I create mental divisions to some extent. And it's almost like a guide, is notation for the reader to read. Okay.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean this is more important, pay attention. But seeing two kind of graphics, you know, fonts on the page,
yes,
makes mind see that thing dialectically. Okay, that's really one thing.
I see. I see.
And I have more rarely, but I do that too. Sometimes I put a italic to the word next to the emphasized word. Okay, kind of a mental syncopation. I kind of I use this visual in multiple ways. And I have to be very careful not to do it too much, because you can always italicize anything you want, you know, kind of, so that you have to know what to do and not to get away with, you know, but that's what I found that I'm very reticent using it. I don't use it anytime I feel, oh, this is important. That's not where I put the italics.
I saw that. So that's why I felt that, you know, I do use italicization quite a bit too in my work, but I use it to, for me, it's usually when I'm quoting another poet, using a redeeming line, something like that, something of that sort, or when I am rewriting a few lines taken from another source. So this is to underline that this is not entirely mine.
You are so good. I am so shameless. I steal lines. Sometimes
your use is more
sometimes
complex.
I don't do. It depends whether it will break the poem there or not, kind of essentially. And also kind of, I don't know whether you can notice, a lot of Shakespeare lines I've changed the lines. You know, they are not exactly the way Shakespeare's lines is. And I mean, even I was looking for trouble, but I did it anyway, you know.
Has anybody pointed those out to you? Or?
Well, if they do, but you know, it's amazing. People do not notice that's what I have done. I mean, in the part I read, there is a very kind of, how does the line go?
Pat, you have some questions, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Murat.
Wait, yeah.
I don't even, I think it's here. I don't know. Yeah. Oh God, I could live in an oyster and count myself belonging to infinite space. There's a very famous line of Shakespeare, Hamlet says, but that's not what he says. He says, I could live in a nutshell and consider myself the king of infinite space. I can live in an oyster and count myself belonging to infinite space. Instead of saying king of infinite space, kind of change it to belonging to.
Okay.
In a certain way, because finally Shakespeare sees Elizabethan life in a certain way, and I kind of interfering my own kind of Eastern sensibility into it, changing it a little bit.
Well, that's actually a jumping off point to a question I had. You talk about living in a nutshell or living in an oyster. These last couple of years with the global pandemic experience, kind of makes me wonder, what difference this project would have made if it had extended into the pandemic, or do you look at the work a little differently having gone through that? Because you have all these themes of presence and absence, and like disturbed presence and disturbed absence. It's like this kind of blurred, troubled sense of place.
Well, Pat, I'll tell you something, by coincidence, I mean, I didn't know, the Camels and Weasels, actually, this is part of a 7-part poem called Structure of Escape. It's spiritual life of replicants, they are all. As a matter of fact, this is, I think, part 5. Io's Song is part 6, the one that I wrote, and now Camels and Weasels is part 7. Okay. Part 7 is around the rest of Hamlet. So one of Camels and Weasels is a phrase from Hamlet. Hamlet asks Polonius, what about the clouds? Does it look like a whale? Does it look like a camel? No, yeah, I mean, kind of essentially, yeah, because he considers him crazy, Polonius, tries to humor him. No, I said, I don't think it looks like a camel. It looks like, I don't know, whatever. It looks like this, it looks like this. And that's, the title comes from there.
Oh, wow, okay, great. Well, definitely looking forward to
now
it.
this next poem is actually continuing, yeah. It's run into the pandemic, yes.
Okay. And we just saw a version of Hamlet that was put on by the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company. And one of the interesting things they did in staging it was that all the actors stayed on stage the whole time. And so, and once they died, they got a new kind of white garment. And so, all the players to be and that had played were all present.
I see. They say the actors played multiple parts, or after they died, they still didn't leave the stage.
They still didn't leave the stage.
Another
ghostly presence remained. So I thought that was an interesting.
No, actually, it's very much suitable what the play is saying.
There has been. I mean, this has happened, I'm sure, in a lot of places. I know a couple, interactive theater, as they call it, where the act begins and it goes on, and then at some point it becomes more interactive. So that same play.
I don't know if I want to be an interactive version of Hamlet. I think that could become dangerous pretty easily.
This is a mystery. Pardon me, go ahead.
You want to finish your point?
No, you go ahead, Pete. But you were saying something.
You were saying something, Ben?
No, I was just making a joke.
I mean, it is like I mean, everybody does something else with this play, and I'm still there, and I'm very much struck, except that it's a historical fact that has happened to this play. You understand? By looking at the play by itself, you wouldn't expect that this play would have such a powerful impact in the following 500 years. And not only in England, all over the world. I mean, this play kind of essentially is meaningful to many, many people, many, many cultures, Yeah, and it is. My theory is that he's already, Shakespeare is suffering from dementia. He cannot control his plot, kind of meandering and going on and kind of coming, oh yeah, I have to go back to it. And so forth.
Like the writing process.
Yeah.
I have one last question about one very specific page, Murat. But before I get to that page, it's it's the page where you have a dialogue with Wittgenstein.
Wittgenstein, yeah.
Right, and Alan Sondheim walks in there. So I was on that page, and I was thinking of very similar dialogues are occurring in poetries around the world between artists and poets of the present and the foregone. So, and there's so many examples came back to me. For example, I start with a Bengali poet who is passed. His name was Sharat Kumar Mukhopadhyay. Mukhopadhyay is Mukherjee in Sanskrit. So he's responding to Tagore and writing, I see truth hiding behind truth, which is my poetry. Then, Israeli poet Yehudai Amichai. So he's commenting on the theme of loss, saying that all poetry everywhere is about loss. And just across...
Loss, did you say? Loss?
Loss, yeah.
Yeah.
And not too far away from where he is, in Palestine, Mahmoud Darwish is saying that winners write history, but poetry never comes to belong to the winners.
Yeah.
People with no poetry are defeated people. And this is, it's a part of an interview. And this clip, Jean-Luc Godard uses in his later film, Notre Musique. Then I thought of Paul Valery I think in the 40s, most likely. In an interview, he talks about the issue of completing a poem. And he says a poem is never completed. It is always abandoned. And John Ashbery responds to it years later, saying that abandonment is completion.
The worst kind of completion, no return.
And it goes on. I found, where I, at some point of time, actually in my last Bengali book, all the poems are actually creative responsive. And my inspiration was a Russian poet who is still living, a little older than me, Alexander Yeremenko. And a part of his work, not much has been translated into English, but there is, one particular chapter of his work where he responds to newspaper reports. And that's what the poem mostly does. So many things came to me while I was on that. So you want to talk a little bit about this conversation between Wittgenstein and Nemet Nejat? And why is Alan Sondheim coming in there?
Sondheim, because Sondheim, and I know him personally, okay. We had very heated arguments about what Wittgenstein is really saying, okay.
Oh, okay.
And the key of it, I personally think, to his dying day, Wittgenstein remained a logical positivist. And the later people don't want to see him that way. They fall in love with a stylish kind of aphoristic style, and they don't want to accept what he's saying, okay? And the image of Wittgenstein is that he goes into this logic of his situation. He says the language, you kind of everything depends on the words being repeated. Then he says, I feel like a bird caught in a box, kind of I cannot get out. Okay, that's famous. Now the question is that he goes into this a blind alley. You know, he goes into this cul-de-sac he cannot get out of. Okay. Then he says about things which do not, they're not facts. We must remain. I think it says must remain silent. Okay. What does must mean? What must means that we should not talk about other things, or we are unable to talk about other things. There's a huge, huge difference. Okay. Because if it said we should not talk about other things, it means that there was in his time a big thing about private language. You know, does it exist? Doesn't exist? For example, by his argument, I say private language doesn't exist. You know, we only have what we are saying. But the other part is that the suggestions that there are things that language basically are things that is not able to say. Okay. And Alan Sondheim means his romantic view of Wittgenstein. Okay, this wish fulfillment view of Wittgenstein. I'm saying he accepts the condition and feels that philosophy should not talk anything about outside it. Whereas the other one says the philosophy should deal with that impossible thing to say. That's what I built that thing about around that thing. I want to ask, if there's time, I would like to ask something to, you know, I read this poem, this book in Bengal, in Kolkata. Okay. I began to read it. We read it in a kind of a bag factory workshop. Suddenly a bulldozer began to run, and I tried to do it, and finally I stopped in the middle. They would not let me stop that poem. They wanted me to read the whole book to them, the whole one from the beginning to the end. And they find something in this poem very much attuned to some of you that were kind of this consciousness, you know the people are doing in Bengal. I have an idea what they are, but I would like your point of view, if you have anything to say about it.
Well, I don't think they're necessarily, they're necessarily writing exactly in that structure. I mean, they're not really adopting that particular structure. No. But another thing about this book is, as you mentioned, it's like you just said a while back, that it's like crumbs that are all over the place, crumbs that touch upon a variety of arts. And like there's cinema, there's reference to painting, there's reference to music. So that, all of these elements are very dear to the writers there. But as far as their own writings are concerned, I don't think, it's there yet.
Yeah, okay.
It's more of a modernistic or postmodernistic lyrical. The postmodernist lyric, I would say, the inclination is more towards that. But there is a tremendous amount of interest in what you were doing in that book.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the Gosals, the thing. I mean, there was, when I was there, we had a meeting. They were reading the passages from his writing, a kind of theoretical writing. And suddenly I realized it's kind of obscure.
That's true, Murat. I mean, I forgot to mention, Ghoshal and his cohorts would definitely be akin to this type of writing.
Those are the people I was talking about, yes.
Right, but they are just a minority unfortunately. Unfortunately,
well, what kind of minority am I? Minority of one?
So I was more referring to mainstream.
No, I was talking to them. No,
right, okay.
Yeah.
I see. All right.
Well, I have something like this. Talisman, the new issue of Talisman, featured me as a writer. There are, I think about 21, 22 people wrote pieces on it. Some of them quite A number of pieces are about animals of dawn, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
And there are other things. If anybody interested, they can go to issue 50.
Well, great. This has been a great conversation. Thank you,
Great.
Murat, for joining us and for reading and for participating in this. I'd like to thank all the listeners to this podcast. We appreciate you, and stay tuned for our next installment of the MUD Parcel series, where we'll be talking to poet and editor Susan Schultz.